And we're live. We're not live. We're recording. I'm Dr. Lawrence Yang. I'm a family doctor here in Surrey. That's one of my identities. Born and raised in Surrey. And I'm really interested about getting conversations out there that can inspire people around healthcare transformation. And I feel really blessed today to have Dr. Arun Garg with us. You know, Dr. Garg, I did my due diligence and I googled a little bit of I googled a little bit about you, and I realized that you've actually been in medicine for many more years than I've been alive. so you graduated from university at the age of 16 with was it a master's in chemistry? What was that?
Not quite that young. I was 17 when I got my master's degree. In India, that was in India. So master's is like BSc honors. So BSc honors level, 4 years post grade 12. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So that was a long time ago. Yeah.
And you went on, and I know that you spent some time in the prairies as well.
Yeah.
How long
that was wonderful. That's my start of journey in Canada. So I was born in India, a city of Taj Mahal. That was a plus. I was reflecting on it, and that exposure in India was formative because, as you know, Agra has Taj Mahal, and we used to get a lot of visitors from overseas. And as a young kid, I used to walk the gardens of Taj Mahal. That was free in those days. And that left an impression. So I always was intrigued by the term foreigner, people visiting India. And that gave me curiosity. And that curiosity led to me coming to Canada at the age of 19 to my postgraduate work. So I came to Regina, Saskatchewan, of all the places. Very cold, but that was exactly September 27, 1965. And,
wow, 1965, yeah. And I can just imagine what a childhood to be able to walk through the gardens of the Taj Mahal as your playtime, as your meditative time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I must say, you do it without realizing what experience you're having. But reflecting back, that is just a wonderful memory of summertime, very hot. Just imagine hot. Then you're able to walk the gardens of Taj Mahal. And we used to do evening walks and go with the family. So you lie in that garden and see all these people coming. And I still vividly remember that, and that left a big impression.
Yes, and from what I've read about the Taj Mahal, I've never been able to visit, but it was supposedly a labor of love that cost many lives.
Yeah.
A monument to romance and to history and achievement too.
Yeah, it's quite a history. Obviously, Mughal Empire of India of that time was at its peak, and it's 1632 took about 30 years, 1632 to 1652. It was built, and the story is that it was built in to really celebrate the love of the emperor to his wife, who died in childbirth. Apparently, she gave 16 births. Mughal Empire, and then the rest is a history. But it's a sad story in some ways, the way inner politics of Mughal court works. Right, they're always killing each other, and the father going after this and son going after this. But they left quite a legacy in India of some big buildings, and one of them is Taj Mahal. And I happen to born in Agra, fortunate enough to have grown up in the shadow of Taj.
Yeah, and no wonder that you have lived an exemplary life of thinking really large and having a really open heart and embracing a lot of humanities at the same time as pretty advanced scientific realms of study as well.
Yeah, I know even.
Yeah, I know that you've also spent time in the health policy side as well. And speak to us a little bit about that, the health
Sure,
policy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So after, I think before I go there, just to share also, you're absolutely right. What you have picked up is a very foundational value of broad thinking. And that always been guided me. And I think that's important in modern day world, because as scientists, as clinicians, we are getting more and more reductive thinking. You know, the science is a reductive thinking. And I think real joy is when you're able to put pieces together. So I think all my life, I think I have worked and have aspired to be what I call connecting the dots. And I think some people call me connector and the collaborator and rainmaker. So these are some of the words people have used, rightly or wrongly. But I think you're right. So that has been I've always looked at the bigger picture, even though I'm a scientist at heart and a cellular physician, medical biochemist, can't get any more specialized than that. But my joy is when I put things together. So health policy was always of interest to me. So after my PhD in Saskatchewan, I came to from Regina, I came to Royal Columbian Hospital to do postdoc. And that's why my 50 years celebration this year. So my wife and I arrived here on July 1st, 1970. And we've been here ever since in one form or another. And Dr. Cody, who became my mentor, he and I stayed together. So I have been on his payroll for 50 years. so, so in terms of health policy, given my broad interest, while still working at Royal Columbian Hospital, I got quite interested in medical profession as a whole, and what can we do to the profession, with the profession as a whole, rather than just subset of it. So that led me into engagement with BCMA. In those days, it was BCMA, and there I served on many different capacities for several years, culminating in board of directors, presidency, but there was this desire that as physicians we need to contribute to the development of healthcare system, healthcare, what healthcare services are, and it was quite difficult to do that if the label on you is that you represent the personal advocacy for physicians through your association. And I said, no, that's not true. As physicians, we have a broad calling. So yes, we do represent, our association does represent physicians collectively in their advocacy for payment, but it's bigger than that. So that's led to development of policy. So we were able to then start Council on Health Economics and Policy at BC Medical Association. And that was one of the early ones. CMA, Canadian Medical Association, always had the councils. So the concept of council and engaging members through that came with that. So that gave me quite an interest in policy development. And we were very fortunate. My friend, Dr. Garg, who was president of BCMA prior to me, he and I became quite a policy wonk, and he chaired the group first, and he had me as a member, and then I chaired that for about good 6, 7, 8 years. And it really gave me an opportunity to bring physicians together, park their personal interest out, and develop policy papers which are really second to none. And they are done by people who know the system without the self-interest of personal advocacy. So I would say if you have to point to what the contribution has been, that has been the major setting the tone how to develop those papers. And we did very well. One of the ones I'm very proud in that context was the paper we wrote on turning the tide. This is now going to take you back a few years, about 20 years. And we said the system is not sustainable. Let's work on the sustainability of the system. And what is our physicians' contribution to system development in public policy domain. So that was one of the first papers we wrote. Since then, obviously, Council has been very active and has produced several papers. But that paper really formed the kind of a backbone and influence public policy in the sense of we had several recommendations and they were incorporated in government policy. So it was very satisfying. You know, today we talk about GP council, specialist council, and the role of doctors of BC in public policy. A lot of it was written in those papers, and very fortunate that government adopted those and made a government policy. And it was a bipartisan effort. It was not a political effort, and we were able to work with all political elements in government. So that was fascinating times. But I'm very proud of that council because it said that physicians can be independent, can bring a very objective view to an analysis which is very thorough. And who else can do it but the people who are in the system? So that was the main drive to engage and have physicians play that role.
I think what you're speaking of is so important. I think we have to highlight the importance of a physician who's on the direct care side of the system, who sees the day-to-day minutia and the nuances of how workflows and operations happens, and then seeing that person who has that perspective is also able to elevate their perspective to a meta-level perspective to see the opportunities for improvement.
Absolutely. I think that's a point which is missed sometime, and as a matter of fact, because it's missed, we all are poorer. Most of the conversations are what's called experts. And experts, in the sense they specialize and they are based and they're full-time developing policy or thinking about things, but they are not practicing or they are not actually experiencing the challenge of what they are recommending on. And this is very true in healthcare. And I think it's so critical because of that the practicing people, whether doctors, nurses, pharmacists, other healthcare workers, we all have to have an opportunity to provide our input. And because what I call voices of the trenches, these are the voices from the trenches. And you are a general practitioner, and even though I am a sub-specialist in my day-to-day practice, I think it's the general practice which is the backbone. I've always said that. When I was president, I fought and really promoted. General practice is the backbone. And the reason that is because of what I said earlier. It is what you need, people who are truly from the practice and have a broader view of how it affects the individual, rather than narrow system approach of individual, which is important. I mean, the science of medicine is so complicated now that you have to have technology, you have to have a specialist. But in terms of public policy domain, this is very critical that we have that forum, we have that place where we could exchange ideas and influence and take those voices. And I think it's fair to say, like program like yours, is so critical in this aspect, so helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Garg, for that astute and wise perspective. I'll have to agree with you completely. You mentioned that it's important to show that physicians need not be biased advocates of self-interest. And I've been privileged enough to sit at a few tables and committees at the provincial level as well as the local level here in Fraser Health. And I do see that as a stumbling block for progress, where a physician speaks from a very siloed perspective. And you can see the silos behind me, and that's kind of what we're trying to connect them. As you said, you've been called a connector. And the name of this podcast is FTS, which means flip the silos or flop the silos, so that to bridge the silos together, to bring them together. So there's some resonance there. How do we find physicians, or how do we develop physicians who are able to separate themselves from that, sometimes the acute pain that causes them to fight from self-interest and bias? Is there a secret sauce to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very thoughtful observation on your part, And I think over the years, I really struggle with this, because even if you go to a room or to a table and have no bias, you are already labeled as such. So you have to recognize that even, and I think a big thing is proof of the pudding is in eating. So I think what you say and what you mean have to be the same. I think these days, in view of transparency and conflict of interest, you have to declare who you are first, so people understand where you're coming from. But having done so, you say that anything I'm going to be talking about is I'm bringing that expertise, which will make your decisions that much better. So I think one has to place themselves at these tables as an expert who generally care about the subject matter rather than how it affects them. And I think that's the separation. And this is very hard for us doctors, because we are so passionate about our individual patients. And because of that, we carry that with us. And what I call visceral reaction. Yes. And I think what we have to have is a cerebral celebration.
Like it, cerebral celebration. And I'm going to bring that with me to my next tables to make very explicit my identity and my roles and how I see where I see my voice coming from, and that I'll be intentionally trying to do a cerebral celebration and to speak from someone who's contributing exactly. To the conversation.
Because it's like strategic thinking. And I think the other thing on that one is, as a physician, one sees the whole system. Even though you are specialized, you see from point A to point Z. And you are then able to bring that, what I call integrative thinking, to the conversation. So integrative leadership, integrative thinking also helps you in placing yourself as a true advocate of the system. Rather, though you are the expertise you're carrying has to guide you. And there are tables where all is needed is your technical expertise. So you have to recognize which table you're in. No point of talking about something which is not the right topic. At some tables, you have to take a very focused, very isolated, very insular approach, because they just want an expert opinion what it means. But in terms of developing policies and broader issues, yes, one has to bring that out and then say, this is a system approach.
Thank you. I've absolutely witnessed that, where some physicians are brought to a table for a specific ask, but then they, unfortunately, because of the passion and the recent pain and maybe the psychological trauma from the system, they go on their own rants about their pet issues, which are also important, but it's the wrong table for it.
Yeah.
And I think this is a critical lesson for physicians showing their effectiveness and their leadership, that they can be self-aware of that.
That's right.
What is being asked of me in this moment? How can I be most helpful now? what is the proper timing for when I advocate for these
Exactly.
specific
So
issues?
it's the self-awareness part, and that's uh, like one of the passions I have developed in the last 10 years is really what we call working with the population. So I've gone from a cellular lab-based physician looking at the biomarkers to a general population-based health promotion, illness prevention. So it's quite a transition.
You're becoming a family doctor. No, I'm joking.
But I've always been family doctor, because I love what they do, what they're capable. And as a matter of fact, as I said, it's the soul of the profession. It's the backbone of what we do. And one of the saddest thing I have is that over the years, what the erosion has taken place in the role of family practice and the influence family practitioner or family practice has in influencing the system. Again, related to our conversation. So I've become quite passionate about chronic diseases. So chronic disease management or chronic disease, as you know, as a family practitioner, I'm sure you see in your daily work, large number of your patients have multiple chronic diseases, and diabetes being the foremost one, and being of South Asian heritage, just I realized 10 years ago that the prevalence of diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, uh, renal disease is about 3 to 4 times higher among South Asians. So that kind of light bulb went and said, look, we need to work on this. And the area I've become very interested in is self-management and self-awareness and empowerment of the population or the community in the care. And I think, unfortunately, what has happened is that our system does not allow full engagement of general practice in that chronic care because they are forced to work through the office as an individual visit. So my passion is how we connect those dots. So the individual care is important and stays, but how general practice then influence the broader community care. So that has been the work we've been doing now with South Asian community in diabetes. And really what I'm talking about is to borrow from my lab business. Uh, we do analysis, but then there is a huge amount of what we call pre and post. In other words, how the specimen gets there and how the results gets to the doctor, so then they're fully utilized. You could have a best lab, but if the specimen is collected on the wrong patient, it's useless, right? Similarly, you could have the best lab and you have the best result. If I don't have that result given to you available in time so you can act, the result is useless. Similarly, I feel that in chronic care, this is where we are. We have some of the best physicians, we have some of the best treatments, we have some of the best specialists, but what we are missing is the integrator, which integrates the pre and post. So physician sees, but then what is patient doing 24/7, 365 with living with that condition? And how that data is all put together and how that is coming together. And with the technology now, it's very important. And then lifestyle plays a huge role. So the diet, the sleep, the stress, the family situation, but there is no real interaction on that. So we are working with South Asian community, try to develop a model whereby we have some, say, uh, resource, community resource, which is available also through general practice connected to this resource. And then that plays a kind of a gap, filling the gap between what I call integrative medicine, thinking of the person as a whole in chronic diseases. So this is work in progress, and it could see the different angles to it. But general practice is very key in this, and I think we need to bring general practitioner back in the loop, and all these things where they still provide that individual care, but they're also part of the integrated care.
You're speaking my language, Dr. Garg.
Oh, okay, good.
It's amazing. I've had many of the similar thoughts because we recognize how limited the capacity currently is of current family practice because of the way our system is designed. And we know that if we are to catch up or even work on the backlog, we need a different approach, and we need to move upstream, and we need to move into the community, and we need to move into patient empowerment where the patient really owns their own wellness.
Absolutely.
Because family physicians are so few.
So our model is, we have taught a lot of this. So it really is empowerment, education, and engagement. But the key is this has to be done, but done with full participation and engagement of the general practitioner as well. So it's not either or, you see. What I find is many tables, people come, but their agenda is to develop systems, but at the same time disfranchise some other providers. But that's not the idea. I think the idea really is to bring everybody together. And this pre and post model is applicable in many parts of the system. So going back to the policy, this is where my interest in policy is, to look at the sincere look at where the gap is. What is the gap in the delivery side, the outcome, and then work on that gap. And diabetes is a very good model for this kind of thinking. I would think this is really missing.
Yeah, it is challenging where family physicians work really hard and they are told from their training, you are responsible for preventive health. You are the primary prevention arm of our system. And they identify as such, and to actually relinquish some of that power to the patients and say, actually, the patients are the first line. It is a paradigm shift for some physicians, and it is a giving up of some power. And you need to have a generosity of spirit and a charity in order to say, I'm okay with that. I still sit well in where I am.
Absolutely.
That is a challenge.
I think we need to differentiate between what I call acute care. In other words, immediate acute care. There is no doubt where action is required, and the acuteness of the injury, acuteness of the trauma, acuteness of the illness requires very procedure-oriented medicine. That's very different medicine than chronic care. And chronic care of many different types, but I'm talking about chronic care, which is chronic diseases. That is very different because now that is with you 24/7, 365. You cannot say you can look after the disease just when you visit the office or when you see the doctor. You can only have the impact when your lifestyle becomes part of it. And you cannot do that without engaging the person themselves in their care. And I think the physician is still a big influencer, but the family, which we have to include, their workplace becomes very important. In most communities, still their faith place where they worship their priest becomes very important in influencing. And I think there is a whole group of specialists in their own right, like pharmacists, the physiotherapist, the dietitian. They all need to play a role in that management. And I think if we do it right, we could really make a huge difference. And that's my passion right now, and sort of working on it. Yeah.
I share your passion, and you actually have the gumption, the courage to actually try to push something like this through. So many of my colleagues were like, wow, this is a big paradigm shift for the whole system. Too much for me. I will just take my small part of it.
Yeah.
But I think you're at that level where you're like, this is my legacy. I sense that from you, that at least you'll advocate for it at a level that might influence some leaders in our system.
I hope so. Yeah, it's not easy because it's still a voice in wilderness in sense, right? But you still have to believe in it and carry on. But lifestyle plays a huge role, And I think COVID, I really got a boost from COVID in that sense. Like what happened, all of a sudden we all became paralyzed. We all became helpless. I mean, here is a system, trillions and trillions of dollar system coming to halt, grinding halt, because of some little virus which we don't even see is choking us. Just imagine, when you really think of it, it kind of proves the conversation we started with, who we are, what we are, why we are doing this, how limited we are in our capacity against what you might call nature. And this is where we as physicians need to take a broader look. And this can only work when the individual in the system is empowered.
Yes, yeah.
And that is, and I think in this conversation, I think the two group of people who are individuals. One is the member of the community or the patient, and the other is the individual physician. And I think that has to be capped. And then I think we're going to see some positive solutions. But I see still most of the tables, everybody is trying to see what I could get out of it myself rather than how to enhance the system. And I think
Yeah.
that's what we have to cut through.
Mm-hmm. And I think a part of that is giving value and recognizing people's contributions where they stand so that they can be a little bit more satisfied and a little bit more free in their spirits to contribute their talents fully at the tables. Tricky task.
Yeah, very, very tricky, and it's not complex, but it's complicated because of the human aspect of it. And again, I think as physicians, we should play a role which bring positive outcomes. And I think that's the other thing you were asking earlier, how I could influence or how I could convey at a table that I truly mean it. Again, it should be outcome focused. So in other words, ability to say, if you do this, this might look like. If you do this, outcome might be something like this. And as physicians, because we are trained to take good history, do the physical exam, and then recommend, I think that plays in our planning and in our strategic thinking. And I think we should utilize that. That talent or that ability to think strategically. We are very good when we are seeing the patient. We have to carry that same in the policy development.
I think I hear what you're saying. To make predictions of potential future outcomes if we try a particular change idea, and then match and map and record whether or not our hypothesis is true, our predictions are fulfilled.
Absolutely.
And in that we learn and we accumulate learning and hopefully pass it on.
And I fantastic. Think physicians, we are very well trained to do that, and I think we somehow park ourselves when we go outside patient-physician relationship and forget that let's work with our strengths, which is strategic thinking, analytical thinking, and bringing it together at the same time, having very outcome-focused, practical approach.
Yes, as physicians, we're often so siloed in our clinical worlds that when we're invited to a table all of a sudden, a dinner party where we're discussing higher level strategy, we actually feel unprepared, and we become self-conscious. And in our mindset of scarcity, we become very tunnel visioned and not unable to contribute well. And
I think you're absolutely right. So I think we need to kind of allow a certain amount of thinking or certain amount of time and opportunity for physicians to participate. And mentoring becomes very important because we as physicians are trained to learn by observation. All of us have had good teachers, good mentors, and the whole medical education system is based on mentorship. And I think we need to also
Mhm.
provide mentorship in this kind of conversation you're having. And hopefully, this conversation can be a mentor to someone,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you are a virtual mentor right now on iTunes and on YouTube. You told me that Dr. Cam Cody was one of your mentors. Tell me, I've not had the chance to meet Dr. Cam Cody. Tell me a little bit about Dr. Cam Cody.
Yeah. This is, first of all, thank you for asking because it means a lot to me personally. It means a lot to my family. We met him when we first came here, July 1970. And there was some magic in our relationship. It just clicked at that time, And he was the individual um, uh, who thought of the system. He was a very so I remember at Rock Columbian Hospital, our lab was in a little corner, but he was influencing the development of the whole hospital. So there was a heart pump sitting in the lab because they thought there should be a open heart facility at Rock Columbian. This is, we're talking 70s. So that's the kind of person he was, thinking of development of others and contributing. So I was very fortunate to learn from him very early on. And he provided true mentorship in the sense, one time I asked, well, what is the secret? What should I do to be successful? He looked at me and he said, just be yourself. So
Wow.
when I still remember that, and I think that kind of guides you, and so it's very important to have a sincere mentor. And mentorship is a very interesting phenomenon. Not everybody can be a mentor. Mentorship is a two-way street. You have to have a giver and you have to have a receiver. Otherwise, it's not a mentorship, right? Coaching is very different than mentorship. And I think um, true mentorship is when the person giving feels that it's falling on the right level. Otherwise, why you give, right? It's being received. It's being received so the fertile ground on which the mentorship is coming is having an influence. And that's developed uh, in fullness of time. It's not something you could teach. It's not something you can force on someone. So the true mentors and mentorees are really that relationship. And I feel I was very fortunate to enjoy that kind of two-way mentorship. And it gave me tremendous strength and tremendous security, because that's the thing mentorship does. It gives you the security in a wild, wild world where insecurity is name of the game. And that gives you opportunity to have carry on what your ambitions are. So I was very fortunate, and I do through this program again recognize the contribution Dr. Cody made, not to us individually, but collectively in Fraser. He was instrumental in building the integrated comprehensive laboratory system, regional system, long before regional approach to solutions were there. If you look at Fraser Health boundaries, they're exactly same what our regional laboratory was, which is an interesting observation because system was working. The policymaker thought that it's okay to use those boundaries because there was a lot of discussion where Delta should it be Richmond, should it be Fraser, should it be Vancouver, and they chose Fraser. So I'm very proud of that legacy and that work which he did, and for me to be part of it. And then obviously after him, I was able to carry on in his shoes.
You've shared some amazing anecdotes of Dr. Cody. You've shared that he is someone who empowers others. He's someone who honors your authentic self, and he's someone who sees the world in an integrative way, in a holistic way. And what a fantastic leader he must have been. I've never met him, but he sounds amazing.
And just imagine what a fabulous gift that is to us and to me individually, to have that at a certain young age I had. Obviously, I was very fortunate because we had that relationship, and not everybody could have that relationship, right? So that's important piece is, I think that it's always good to have at least one mentor, and at least in your lifetime, one mentoree.
Yes, it sounds like a very special relationship. I've actually never discussed the difference between mentor and mentee and coach and coachee. And it sounds like it's the mentor-mentee has a very special quality to it.
It's more spiritual in the sense that, it's a connection at that level. All these relationships have overlaps. They move from one to another. It started as a teacher and a student, or a coach and a player, and then mentor and mentoree, and father and son. They're all kind of intertwined but different.
Yes, and I think as someone who has learned through many different silos of advanced learning, you are someone who integrates and sees the common threads throughout different patterns, and you bring it and you extrapolate into other visionings of the potential future. And I could hear hints in your voice about when you were talking about community health, about the potential for technology in biometrics, monitoring and empowering patients with their own health information. You mentioned the integrated way that the labs work. You talked about integrated medicine and holistic approaches with the population. And then you actually use the term integrated leadership. It sounds like integrated is your brand. Fantastic.
Yeah, I think you're right. You picked up on something there because, and again, everyone reacts to things, what their upbringing is, what their heritage is, what their culture is. So someone like myself who has lived an integrated life in the sense of East and West very early on, like you alluded to me coming to Saskatchewan. And I think this is where the seeds were born of integration. Because I think I was the first one visualized 1965. Canada was very amorphous, very singular, very homogenized. It wasn't heterogeneous, diverse country we are today. I think I was the first student from India in the university. It's interesting.
Wow.
The word yogurt, nobody has heard about yogurt. The only yogurt available was in a far away grocery store in a corner of a city. Now imagine where we are. So it was very different. But then to visualize that, and so I was involved. I said, rather than just not doing anything, we started International Student Club, International Student Association, and purposefully called it international. In those days, they used to call them Foreign Student Association. I said, no, we should call it international, because Canada, last time I saw, was part of the globe. So Canada is part of international. So I want people from all over the world mix with each other. So we started that. And that I started to see I was very privileged in that, started to see the benefit of mixing and integrating. So best of East and best of West has been my thinking all along. And in medicine now, it's become very important, because Western medicine has taken us to a very long road of what I call reductive medicine, because science by nature forces you to be reductive. You open one, another question comes, then another question comes, then another question comes. So you start to become deeper and deeper and deeper, which is important. But it takes you away from holistic thinking of a person as a whole. And if you look at traditional Vedic philosophy of India or Chinese medicine, it's very holistic. They are based on observation rather than experimentation. One is very linear and other is very circular. So people say it's either or, but I say no, that's not how I think. It's a mix of those two, the best of the two. So we have to have experiment, but we also have observation. We have to have linear thinking, but we have to have circular thinking. And I think that's what has been kind of my lifelong living. And I think it has worked for me. And I just plan to do more of the same, but at this level now.
I love it, Dr. Garg. What you're speaking to is to be able to hold the dualities of two different frameworks of looking at the world at the same time, and to embrace the complexity that is life, that is the whole person, and trusting that we have the capacity to do so. And so much of our reductionist shortcut behaviors are because we're trying to simplify and categorize the world so that we can hold the power, and I think many of our physicians have become habitualized into that, and to kind of unprogram that and to welcome that complexity and those circles and straight linear paths at the same time. I think that's a fantastic challenge, but I sense that there's a shifting culture where there is possibly a more openness at this time to an integrated, holistic approach.
Yeah. And I think in Canadian context, it must be said that we're very fortunate. We're very blessed. We are in a country which, by culture, allows that to embrace it, to celebrate it, and to implement it. And I think you and I are very fortunate in that sense that we can bring that to the table and make Canada that much better, and I think there is another angle here which doesn't get talked about, and that is economics, because Canada is not an island itself. It's part of the broader globe. And I think having the heritage and having the capacity in Canada of this multicultural, multi-diverse group historically, I think we should capitalize on this and build these fusion of relationships, and that then shows up in economic development and in trade. We have done very well between Europe and Canada. We have done very well with USA and Canada. And I think we need to take this and apply it to the rest of the globe, in particular China and India with large population masses, South America, Africa. I think we have, as Canadians and as especially physicians, especially in health, we can play a huge role in this integration and what I call integrative medicine. And Lawrence, I think I must say a word of caution here. I'm not talking about complementary medicine. I'm not talking about applying this medicine versus that medicine. I'm talking about is that thinking about the health. I'm talking about thinking is integrative. So you're thinking of the mind, body, and intellect in a thinking component. It's not like using treatments or using therapies which are not tried or are out there, but not part of the modern medicine. And there is a subtle difference there, but I think it's important that mainstream medicine adopt integrative approach to solution of problems.
Yes, I think thank you for clarifying that. I think I know what you mean in that it's not about specific products or treatments that we will gain from the other continents. It's about a cognitive diversity in the philosophy and strategies of healing and wellness. It's kind of like a thinking pattern and thinking cultures that if we have more options, we will more likely generate better innovation. I think I hear that.
Exactly. And culture plays a huge role in health. And I think we have seen this in COVID, and we see that everywhere. And I think try to say that same recipe will work in every dimension. It's just not right. So we need to be cognizant of that. We need to be sensitive for that, and especially in chronic diseases. In chronic diseases, culture plays a huge role, and self-empowerment of the patient becomes very important. And so then we get into diet and sleeping patterns and exercise, especially diet. Food becomes very paramount in health. And so that's part of integration. And we haven't talked in this conversation, but the role of mind in health, what mind does, how you think about yourself, how you bring it together becomes very important. And these are not the concepts you pick up in going through a medical school, but they are very important concepts.
I would totally agree. As a family doctor, I take care of so many issues that so many complaints that patients do bring to the table. And so often I cannot find one specific biochemical, physiologic cause of it, but I do see some potentially variances in the cognitive processes that if addressed may make a big difference in how the physiology manifests.
Absolutely. And
I don't know where to learn more about that.
And there is a lot of more and more experiment. When I think of these things, it starts to unfold that what we call part of being mind was like even understanding homeostasis in body. We did not understand all the endocrines, paracrines, and the autonomic nervous system, all that in terms of the role it plays in homeostasis. And I think that becomes now part of the day-to-day conversation. Similarly, the role mind plays, we don't understand it right now. We haven't mapped out the biochemical pathways taking place when you have emotional reaction, when you have anger, when you are happy. But one day we'll find out, and then you'll say, oh, this is part of the course. But in the meantime, we cannot ignore it, and it has to play a role, And if I could use an example of symphony, in symphony you have players, and you have a conductor, and you have a director. And to me, that's what integration is, able to combine those three so the music comes. So you see all three play a very different role, and without them you won't have music. Similarly, in health or integrative leadership, this is that combination or the fusion of those components. You could label them anything you want, but it's a recognition that there are different components and they play a different role, and we need to bring them together.
I love that analogy and in that metaphor. And in that metaphor, what's interesting is the conductor may make the least sound, maybe no sound, but is the connector for all of these different integrative approaches. It's beautiful.
And body is like that. So the heart and liver, those are players. But there is mind, which is the conductor. And how it reacts is playing that role. And we know very little about the role of intellect or supraconsciousness plays in health, but that's there like a producer. Now, just because we know very little about doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I think in our day-to-day parlance, we need to pay attention to that. And that, to me, is the engagement. And I find certainly in South Asian community, that conversation really draws people in, because that is missing in their thinking. And they've been brought up with that observation, and it's part of their day course. So I think we need to connect that.
Yes, the South Asian community is near and dear to my heart. I ended up marrying somebody of the Indo American,
Okay, well,
but you were named as one of the most influential Indo-Canadians, top 100 influential Indo-Canadians recently, a few years ago. How did that feel for you? Was that something that you were easy to accept?
yeah, well, I think Vancouver Sun did some polling. I think it's nice to be recognized, obviously. It's always nice to be recognized. But I think more important is have the blessings, able to be doing those things. I mean, there are many, many things one feels should have happened to them and they don't happen. So, but you take things which are happening and you enjoy. So, in my life, I've been very fortunate. My medical colleagues and my professional colleagues have given me tremendous feedback and tremendous satisfaction of recognition. And my wife and my son and myself value that. Yeah.
One of the first times I saw your name, I had just started practice in Surrey, and it was the Vancouver Sun again, and it was something Dix. It was an award. It had the word DIX in it. I remember. I don't remember. Do you remember what award it was?
No, I don't recall. Yeah.
Anyways, it was something from the Doctors of British Columbia, and because of your service to the community, your service on committees, and your commitment to education, and
Dr. Ricks? You're thinking of Dr. Don?
Sorry, it was Ricks. Yeah, Don Ricks.
Dr. Don Ricks, yeah.
I actually don't know that doctor either, but I remember the name.
So Dr. Don Ricks was a pathologist, and this gold medal is named after him. So I was very fortunate to receive that. We were talking about Dr. Cody. In my journey, being a pathologist, obviously, I was greatly influenced by pathologists, and I was very fortunate to work with Dr. Cody and Dr. Ricks and Dr. Hardwick. And Dr. Hardwick is the professor of pathology at UBC. And these three played a major role in building pathology and laboratory medicine. And all three of them had tremendous intellectual capacity of this strategic thinking. And in last 50 years, I've been very fortunate to have so many people to learn from and observe. And I think one of my message to young physicians is be ready to learn, be open, And if you are willing to learn, you will get it, you see, or you will receive it. If you're not open, if you're not ready to receive, you will not receive. So we were talking earlier about mentorship. Mentor is only good if you are willing to bring that change, or you listen and you hear that. And I think that's a very important perspective one has to have.
Thank you. I hear from you, like, listen to understand, and try to be so open to growth and to change, and to welcome ideas rather than kind of pushing back with what you have already inside of you. Welcome that there is more to the universe, kind of.
Yeah, I think it's important, and I think if I may quote Mahatma Gandhi on this, because very early on I remember reading, he said, I want my house to have windows and the wind of all cultures to fly, but I will not be able to swayed by them or blown away by them. So in other words, what he was saying was, to read that at an early age, it leaves an influence on you that you can be yourself and still be strong believer in what you believe in, we still have different cultures coming. So he was describing this very notion you were just saying.
I was able to last year this time be in Mumbai and visit his house there, and so many really it's inspirational quotes there. And what I hear from that, my interpretation is that we need not be afraid of opening our minds to entertain new ideas. They will not take control of us, and that we will have maintain that agency to choose the best path.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think in medicine especially, we have to make sure that we never close our mind, because uh, that's the backbone of our thing, And again, Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to be, which you see in others. So I think he was a great influencer.
Yeah, he was very courageous, and I see elements of his courage in you. You're speaking sometimes counterculture, some of your stuff, and you had the courage. You mentioned you were part of you came to a very homogenous Canada, and then a couple years. Well, when were you the president of the BCMA again? What year was that?
I was president in 93, 94. So
less than 20 years later, you went from one Indian guy, if I may call you that, in Saskatchewan, to the president of the Doctors of British Columbia, in British Columbia, the most desirous, I would say, place in Canada. What a fantastic journey that was. And you had people like your mentors who believed in your capacity, your capability, and you made that choice to believe it too. And you took it to some of the highest levels in this profession. How does one have the gumption and courage and audacity to do something like that?
I think you have to believe in yourself. There's no doubt about it, and then just stay with it. And give your best. So follow your passion, I think, as people say. And I think I was genuinely interested in public policy. I was genuinely interested in professional engagement. And those two things then took me to the buildings of BCMA. And then, as I say, rest is history. And with that passion and with that commitment to work, you could achieve anything.
Very inspiring, Dr. Garg. I don't have many questions left, but I do want to ask you one thing. You've mentioned many times strategic thinking, and I have a sense that means a lot to you. But for some of us listeners, it just means like thinking about cause and effect and drawing out potential pattern. What does strategic thinking mean?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I've thought of many times what I mean by when I say, so I think if I could use the analogy from my own life, I'm very greatly influenced by Vedic philosophy, and I have a heritage in it. So I talk about, and I've written a bit on it, and that is ability to decipher positive outcomes. And it's based on what I call Raj Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jap Yoga, and Gyan Yoga. And what it might mean by that is these are, everybody knows about yoga, and yoga, you talk about yoga practice. And to them, yoga practice is essentially asanas, that's the postures. And that is such a small portion of yoga. The book from which yoga philosophy has been derived, it was written 500 BC or something.
What was it called? What's that book called?
Patanjali Yoga Code of Yoga Shastra. And he has about 300 paragraphs in it. Only 2 are dedicated to asanas. So the point I'm making is that asanas, yoga, everybody talks about, is such a small portion. Very big portion is devoted or dedicated to analytical, critical, strategic thinking.
Wow.
And that's called Gyan Yoga. And Gyan Yoga is the ability when you can declutter your mind and able to convert information into knowledge, and knowledge into wisdom, and wisdom into bliss. And that is strategic thinking. Or
Wow.
that's what strategic strategic thinking is. So when you have a problem, you need to cut through the crap and say, okay, what does it mean? You know, and take it so on. And before you know, it becomes part of your daily living. So those
Yeah.
5 yogs combined, it's a journey. You'll never achieve full 100% of it, but you try. And of which that, so strategic thinking is very much part of that. So
So
lately, I was just going to
go
say,
ahead.
lately we are also working on, there is for physicians, a whole program called LEADS, LEADS, which is based on quality management and quality circles. And my colleague, Dr. Graham Dixon, and I are working. So we have taken the 5 principles of LEADS, which is LEADS. L is learn about yourself, find yourself. E is engaging others. A is achieving results. D is developing collaboration. S is developing systems. And I have taken those 5 principles and overlaid 5 principles of yoga:
Wow.
Raj Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jap Yoga, and Gyan Yoga. And it gives you a tremendous insight into what we're talking about in terms of physicians working in the committees, how to influence committee work, and then obviously strategic thinking, and how you take all kinds of information. To me, data is noise, and how you take that and convert that into knowledge, and then convert it into, first into information, then knowledge, and then wisdom, is really what strategic thinking is about. Sorry, long-winded answer, but to a very interesting proposition.
It's a beautiful response. I want to join that course. I want to do leads and I want to do the 5 yogas after. When will that come out?
That I think we should seriously look at that, and because I've been working with Dr. Graham to see if we could incorporate that into some sort of course program, and he has a program on leads now available, what he calls Hero's Journey, and I'm hoping to incorporate some of that in his program.
The hero's journey. I remember studying that back in high school.
No, this is very practical. As you know, we talk about quality circles, we talk about quality efficiencies and quality programs, and Institute of Health Quality. And it's not in isolation. You know, you cannot be a champion of quality unless you understand yourself first.
Absolutely.
You know, and so I think it's all interrelated. Again, going back to integrative leadership.
It really is. There is a concern from many of my colleagues that once we get into visualized data about performance, about clinical performance, that it will turn into people judging them on their performance. And so might be a subconscious or conscious resistance to actually visualizing data about their own performance. How do we cross that bridge? Any ideas?
That's true. You know, I think as physicians, we're very, very careful, right? And very individually driven. And I think, again, we have to make sure that if you're into any of these quality programs, that they're again more of a system improvement rather than individual pointing finger. And that is the key, and that's what we are most afraid of. So rather than pointing a finger at the individual, the data is converted into information. Information is converted into knowledge. And then you could say, okay, let's make the change. So you take the individual thing out of it. Otherwise, you're not going to get participation. You're not going to have music. It will be noise.
Yes, the conductor will not be effectively conducting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You've gone through so many different areas in systems exploration, really, and you've come out and you're still in the system, and you still have a sense of charity and generosity, and you speak ill of no one. How? How do you come through? You survived a presidency, and much of that I've heard from my colleagues is a survival. It's a whirlwind of challenges. So, what is your secret sauce?
I think you're right. Because a lot of my colleagues can hardly wait to get out of the system, or want to retire, or feel burned out, or distressed. I think. First of all, you have to count your blessings, and I'm first one to say, obviously, family support becomes very important, and friends and colleagues, all that. So it's not in isolation, but I think fundamentally it is you have to follow your passion. So if you're doing what you love, ideas will come, and then you have to kind of evolve yourself or reinvent yourself, or have many different incarnations or avatars, but carry on. So I would say that has been my kind of recipe. I reinvent myself all the time. So I think that has worked for me. But I think part of it also is to have a very solid belief in yourself and following the passion you are doing. But then you do need mentors, you need coaches, but most important, you need family and family support, and which I've been very fortunate.
I have as well. I could not do anything I do. I couldn't have this conversation without my family backing me up outside of this conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'm just intrigued. Is that a picture you have of is that from wheat pools from Saskatchewan, this fort?
It probably is. You recognize it from 1965, don't you?
It's quite unique, Yeah.
It is. I thought it was the most fitting that this one represents where the patients are. This one represents the physicians in the community, and this one's the acute care, and that's maybe doctors of BC. So I
think that's very pertinent what we are talking about. That represents the philosophy you're portraying there. Yeah, because it's the integration of these. I'm sure they're interconnected,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You might not be visualizing it. So I think in my background, you see that Canada-India Network Society.
I was going to ask you about that. What is that? CINS.
So that is our contribution to build the link between Canada and India on health. So we have this not-for-profit society where we're bringing people together. And again, we have narrowed it into chronic disease along the line we are talking about, and leadership. So we're developing a program with Graham on leads in India, because India can use some Canadian common sense and management, and whereas Canada can use India's integrative approach to system solutions. So we're trying to merge that. So that's the purpose of that group, and we're making some progress, slow but progress. Yeah.
And it's not pronounced SINS, right? No, it's CINS.
Yeah, so it's CINS, we call it, Canada-India Network Society. It's a
Canada Indian
not-for-profit
Network Society.
society.
And there's a website if people want to learn more, right?
Yeah, there is a website, and we organize meetings mainly and bring people together, and we support fair amount of engagement with the community. So we provide a lot of support to different organizations. Like my belief is that wherever possible, collaborate. If somebody can do it, why you should do it? So we support Canadian Liver Foundation, hypertension, diabetes, um, heart and stroke to connect with the community. So the group plays a role, and we have a network of people where we could bring together, again, giving out to those connections.
Mm-hmm. There, I was lucky enough to visit India for the first time around 1 year ago this
Wow.
year, and that's when I went to Mumbai. And but I also spent some time in Vellore, and that was actually my primary destination. In Vellore, in South India, there was one of my friends who's living in Australia. She actually came and facilitated a compassionate leadership workshop at the Quality Forum in Vancouver right before the pandemic hit. I don't think she was responsible for bringing the virus to Vancouver, but it was at the end of February. But the year before, she had invited me to Vellore, and I spent a week in what some people would call an ashram. My first experience there, and it was a fantastic experience. I only remember the name was Peedam, Peedam, but they had a whole community there with a spiritual leader, Shakti Amma, who was an avatar of the divine feminine, and they actually were running a whole community there that was sustainable. They were doing their own farming, their own recycling, amazing fields full of natural medicines, herbal medicines, and they had an Ayurvedic or Vedic medicine center there that was being built, a massive hospital, Ayurvedic medicine hospital that was funded largely by some British Columbian benefactors.
Really?
Donations.
I'm not familiar.
It was fantastic. I'll have to send you the link for this amazing community. It was so inspiring, and living there was super cheap. The food was delicious, and my wife and I spent a week there, and our lives changed forever. We were like, wow, we can actually build a sustainable community that does not really cause much karma into the environment. Yeah.
India really is full of dichotomies. You have the best of the best and the worst of the worst. The whole spectrum is there, and there are many ashrams like these where people are making a go in a very different ways. India is a very interesting country in that sense. So large, so complex, so diverse, and still provide hope for future. Examples like these allows you to say, we can overcome. But they have lots of issues. Otherwise, it's
messy. Just like anywhere there's messiness. But just like you said, we need to integrate and join these silos and take the best from each side, just like you've mentioned.
And we're very fortunate in Canada that we have the luxury to do that, because it's a large country, but a small population, and that allows us to have some order, and Canada has its own culture. Canada has its own vibrations, and I think we need to build on it. And health sector is ready. I think post-COVID has taught us, and I think it really opened a lot of people that we need to bring the change.
Yes. I want to thank you again for your time. If someone wanted to reach out to you and ask a question, are you on Twitter? Are you on, where might they reach you?
Yeah, I've been quite active in social media. So I'm on Twitter and Facebook, and happy to connect with them. LinkedIn, all three. My Twitter handle is Dr. Arun Garg, very simple. And Facebook is Arun Garg, or Arun Garg MD, and LinkedIn. So I'm happy to connect with people.
my editor will put it across the screen when it's there. Thanks, Praj. Today you've spoken a lot about recognizing how lucky we are, how blessed we are, and having a mindset of gratitude and privilege. And I recognize my privilege of having you on this podcast today. Thank you so much, Dr. Garg. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, and I look forward to interacting with you more over social media. And maybe
connect. I think we have a lot in common. I didn't realize. I think thanks for having the opportunity. Thanks for asking me, and I really enjoy the conversation.
Me
Thank
too.
you very much.
Me too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye.